Hello and welcome to the Creative Academy, your go-to source for accountability, coaching, and community. I'm Donna Barker, and with me today is Ronda Payne, the girl with a pen. Ronda and I are going to talk today about two things. Ronda's the co-founder of a writers group, a group that meets in person. And then we're also going to talk about how many of us struggle to call ourselves writers. And Ronda and I have a similarity in that both of us are career writers for other people and newer to this whole author thing. And when we were talking, we were realizing, it's not just me who was a little uncomfortable with stepping up and going to writers groups and saying, hey, waving my flag and saying, I'm one of you. So Ronda, take a second and tell us just a little bit about you and also why you started a writers group out in the area that you live in.
Well, I, like a lot of people who are watching this, grew up as a writer. From the point that I could hold a pen or a pencil, I was cutting paper up, stapling it into little booklets, and writing stories in it. And I know that that's a consistent story among a lot of people in the Creative Academy. It's just what I've always been. But the ability to call myself that didn't come easily. So I started off with fiction writing. Even when I was in high school, I took a course through Writing Ridge. I don't even know what the institute calls themselves now, but back then I was 17. I took this course, Writing for Children and Teenagers, because I had always been a writer. Yeah. And so I took this course, I wrote some stories, I submitted them. I was told I had great potential. I learned some things, all very important, but I didn't do anything with it. Years passed, a strange writer block happens. I like to joke that I had writer's block for about 13 years. And I went on with my life. I went on to a career in marketing. I was a marketing executive for about 15 years. And then a change happened. There was always this belief that I would become a writer, that somehow this was going to happen, but without me really doing anything, because I wasn't doing anything. Right. I wasn't writing stories. I had lots of ideas. I had lots of thoughts. I can show you, I've got folders all over my office of story ideas from 30 years ago. And I just wasn't doing anything. I'd think about it. That's all it was.
But you have folders of story ideas, so you were writing something down.
Yeah, occasionally. Okay. Or I'd be on a walk and something would come to me.
Okay. And in your marketing career, was that writing based or like, yeah. So you have been a writer the whole time, and yet you're sitting here saying, I wasn't writing, I'm not a writer. It's such an interesting psychology.
And yet my colleagues, my employees, my colleagues, all of them identified with the fact, you're a really good writer. Can you look at this? So it was feeding that belief that somehow this becoming a writer thing was going to happen, but I still wasn't doing anything.
But you were. This is the funniest thing. Like, I'm arguing with you because, and the only reason it's like it's the little voice on this side arguing with my little voice on this side, because every job I've gotten since I was out of university has been based on my ability to write. And the biggest part of my jobs have always been writing and project management. But without the writing, I wouldn't have had projects to manage, because I was, editor of magazines for nonprofit organizations and creator of curriculum. So it was all writing, but I never called myself a writer either, ever.
Well, and we even hired writers. Being a marketing manager or a marketing director, it got to the point that I was spending more time managing people than doing the writing.
Right.
And we would hire writers to write the direct marketing pieces. And I would still have to go in, like all writers do, I'd have to go in and fix it, because that's how I was. When my staff were working on the internal newsletters or the external facing newsletters, they would always bring it to me, not because I asked them to, but because, again, there was always that comment of, well, you're such a good writer.
Right.
And yet it still wasn't enough for me to believe. And I think that's because I've lived in two minds of, there's the professional job writing, and then there's the creative writing. And I wasn't a writer without this creative writing piece. So fast forward, time passes, marketers get laid off. We're always the first ones to go when there's issues. And that happened enough times that I found myself at home at a desk looking for the next marketing gig, because that's how I made my money. And someone asked me to write web copy for their website. And suddenly I became self-employed as, go figure, a writer.
Yeah.
And so when I went to networking events and I was asked, what do you do? It was easy enough to say I'm a writer, because in my mind, that writer was completely different than the writer that had existed in me since I was 6 years old, that wrote stories, that had ideas. Two completely different writers inside the same body, and yet somehow I could justify it.
Right. So,
again, And so then again, fast forward, we moved to Maple Ridge. Well, we moved back to Maple Ridge. I had been living in Maple Ridge off and on, and we moved back, and I met Catherine Wagner, and another girl that we knew mutually introduced us. And we realized that there was a lack of tools, of opportunities, of connectivity in an in-person setting that was more than critiquing for creative writers. We wanted to bring something at a level of not quite education, but workshopping maybe, right? I mean, it is education, it's a form of education, but we knew that that piece was missing, and we were also missing out on community. People were getting together at coffee shops and what they called critique groups. And there's one that goes quite well here in Maple Ridge, but they were missing this community, come and go, meet new people. They were missing that element. And so that is what drove us to start Golden Years Writers. So there you go, in a nutshell. That's the journey so far.
It's a really interesting thing. In my community, which is north of the city of Vancouver, we don't have a writers group. And I've been looking around, and I belong to a really fabulous writers group that meets in person, that used to be a chapter of the Romance Writers of America. And I joined,
which I am also a member with you.
Yes, of which you are also a member. And Crystal, who is within the Creative Academy, one of the Creative Academy founders with me, is the president currently, and I'm the vice president currently. So we're the founding members of this iteration of what used to be the Romance Writers Group, but is now just generally the Greater Vancouver Writers Association. But the point of that is, when I first decided that I wanted to write a novel, I was looking around for a writers group, and I couldn't find anything locally. There was a group that met in my local area that they got together once a month and they write words together, but they don't, but even then, like the couple of meetings that I've been to, well, in fact, there were two groups, one of them is disbanded. They weren't doing that piece that you're talking about, the education. It was community. There was absolutely that part, but I didn't feel like I was meant to be there. So fly forward, you get the romance group. I'm not a romance writer, but I needed community. I absolutely needed community. People to tell me that, yes, I'm a writer, even though how old am I? For 25 years, I've been making my living as a writer, and now for 16 years as a self-employed writer, I still didn't feel like a capital W writer. And I certainly didn't feel like an author in waiting. Like, you know.
Oh, good Lord, no.
So
absolutely not.
And the courage pat myself on the back, the courage it took for me to go to that first meeting and kind of say, I think I'm one of you people. Am I one of you people? I'm curious.
And I get that. Like I say, I mean, I know that when I went to networking meetings, as I say, it was this split brain. At my first networking meetings, it was a bit hard because there was the self-employment thing, and I'd always been employed by someone else. And here I was being self-employed and calling myself a writer. So, I mean, that was difficult, but nowhere near as difficult as being a creative writer and then putting on that new W and saying, oh no, I'm a writer. because I felt like such a complete sham.
Yeah.
So even when Catherine and I met, and we met the first time at a coffee shop, and we talked about what golden writers could be. Of course, it didn't have a name at that point, but we talked about what it could be. And I remember even sitting there then thinking, well, who am I kidding? I like to write. This is that dream that I've been walking around with since I was 6 years old, but I'm not published. I don't have any creative writing credentials. Who the heck am I kidding? And to be honest, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but my guess would be Catherine felt similarly, because at that point in time, she was coming at it from a different perspective than I. She'd written nonfiction in a lot of different venues, had a lot of great success, been published, did a lot of great things with her nonfiction, and was just going out into this world of fiction, had not been published, but recognized the need for community in our community. And so I think we were both coming at it from personal need, as well as recognition of overall what the community need was.
When you're saying, you know, these conflicting parts of you, one of the things that I think of, one of the things that I was able to figure out, and it wasn't until I self-published my novel, it wasn't until I didn't self-publish my novel for about 18 months while it sat ready to go. That's when I realized this. As a career nonfiction technical writer, I have zero ego related to any of my words. I can give it to a client. If the client says I hate it, so they'll hand it back and I'll be like, okay, I'll try again. What did I miss? I never got to write in my voice because it was always in the client's
You're always writing in their voice.
I'm always writing in their voice. So when it came, so like that's a head job. That is
entirely, it's 100%, because you're putting words down every single day, and yet they aren't yours. You don't feel attached to them. And I even got, I want to say more screwed up, but you'll understand what I mean, in that I also write freelance. So when the question came of, are you published? I was of so many different minds and so conflicted, because at this stage in my career, I've been published thousands and thousands of times. I have thousands of nonfiction articles that are published using a certain degree of my own voice and interpretation, and coercion of interviews. And I don't mean coercion in
I understand,
but just, you know, taking those things and making them work into the topic and creating an article that has flow, that has story, that is readability, that has all the things that fiction needs. But for me to go to a writer's group with somebody that's holding up their shiny romance book that they've had published, and for me to say that I've been published, oh, freaking forget it. That was not going to happen.
You know, well, so that's an interesting thing. And I just wanted, like, well, two things right now. One is to finish that other piece I started. Once I sat with my complete novel, development edited by the fabulous Eileen Cook, so I knew it was a good story at that point, and I still didn't have the confidence. It was because that was a story from my heart. It was my voice. It was my story. I mean, it's not factual. I have never murdered a man psychically, though I can tell you there are lots of times that many would have died. But the fact is that it's, you know, it really is a heart story. So, and that was where I was able to finally make the distinction between why I have this split, why I can call myself a technical writer, but I was really struggling with that other piece. So that was that. One of the things that we instituted in the writers group, when it was still the Romance Writers Organization, a couple of years ago, somebody had the brilliant idea of doing something called Add a Girl acknowledgements. So every meeting we have workshops, we bring in speakers for workshops, but we also have a short business meeting, and then we have, they're called chocolades at this point, where for 20 minutes or so we go around the room and we just let people say, this is what I did in the last month. And it's really short. It's like, I submitted to an agent and I got a rejection, or I submitted to an agent and I got, they asked for more pages. And it took a long time, but now people are saying, well, I submitted to, there's one woman who writes she's a former geologist. And so she writes nonfiction, and now she gets her chocolate, because that is writing, and we count all of it. And it takes a lot of that, like, I don't know. I'm sure
I actually have a piggyback on that further talks about what we're talking about this imposter syndrome. So Catherine and I, because we live in the same community, when we come to the Greater Vancouver Writers Group, when we come for meetings, we usually come together.
Yes, you always sit together over the stuff.
Well, we try not to always sit together, but it's because we get there late, writers. So she knew about a success that I had. And when we were at the last meeting that we were at together, she knew about this. And she kept giving me the hairy eyeball during the chocolates and saying, chicken soup, because I'd had a story published in Chicken Soup for the Soul. And she kept looking at me, mouthing chicken soup. And I was so wigged out and had demoted the value of that sale of my work that I wasn't even willing to stand up for a chocolate, because it's no big deal. It's just chicken soup. Lots of people get published in there. It's still nonfiction. It's personal essay. It's not really fiction. It's not creative. Like, I don't know what, and it happened way more than a month ago. All these things that I was giving myself excuses to not celebrate that, in addition to the fact that the other thing that went through my head was, you've already celebrated it. You and your husband had a little woot woot when you got the contract and you signed it. Then you had another woot woot when the box came, and okay, it's time to put it away now because it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And I allowed myself to do that to myself. And so I think things like the chocolates are amazing, because even though I didn't get over my own hurdle, it forced me to recognize why I wasn't getting over my own hurdle.
Right. So it's something that we see often. I mean, in the real live meeting writers group, people dismissing their accomplishments or downplaying them. In the Creative Academy, in the mastermind groups that I run, even, one of the things we do every time we start a meeting, we check in with, so what did you accomplish that you want to celebrate with us in the last 2 weeks since we met? And it's so funny. Fortunately, I'm in touch with most people in those groups between time, and sometimes people say, well, I didn't do anything. I'm like, are you kidding me? I've got emails from you. I have video footage of you. I have all of these things that show. So I don't know what can we do? So let's see, what can we do as writing mentors? You, Ronda Payne, because you are, and myself in my roles as with the writers groups that I belong to, what can we do to help writers acknowledge these accomplishments as actually being important to acknowledge?
I feel a bit like the pot calling the kettle black by even answering this, but I have a saying that I repeat to people quite often, in that writing is an incredibly subjective field, and yet the majority of us writers are incredibly sensitive people that have a very hard time taking criticism. So those two things put together are not a good combination. We put our work out that is so subjective to allow for criticism, and yet it's very hard for us to take that criticism because we are sensitive, but it's that sensitivity that makes us good writers. So I've been known to say, I don't know what the heck God was thinking. because it's not just writers, it's anybody in any artistic endeavor,
Yeah.
right? It's musicians, it's actors, it's painters. We all tend to be on the more sensitive side, and all of our work can be critiqued by anyone. And it's crazy. So I think there's two parts to helping boost a writer friend and to get ourselves to this place where we can accept the good that we've accomplished. I think one is to continually work on loving ourselves. And this has been a lifelong journey for me, but it's become really more profound in the last year. I've been working with a coach that I would say 99% of our work is based on Ronda needs to learn to love all of Ronda's parts. No matter what happens, no matter whether the sky falls or a deadline gets missed or the bills are overdue, whatever it is, Ronda still has to love herself. And I have a quote from Lucille Ball outside my office door that says, "Love yourself first." I can't read it all because I don't have my glasses on, but love yourself first and everything else falls into place. You really have to love yourself to get anything done in this world. So every time I leave my office, I see that.
Nice.
And we have to love ourselves, because how else can we celebrate if we don't?
Yeah.
The other thing I think we need to do is to do what we do in critique groups, in workshops, in chocolades, when we're with other writers, to really just show them that those accomplishments are worth celebrating, because they are. Like, they 100% are. It doesn't matter. You know, you hear that all the time about how few people get published. Oh, you know, you're among like the 0.5% of the world if you actually get a book published. It doesn't matter. The sheer fact is that if you can put down words, you're already ahead of the people that I was 30 years ago when I wasn't putting words down at all. So just by putting down words is something. When I finished the first draft of my memoir, and I wrote it by hand, I don't recommend that, but that was the process for that project. When I finished that, my husband and I went out for dinner, because we recognized that, like, I cried when I finished it. I cried. And our nephew was living with us at the time. And I remember saying to him, okay, we're going to go out for dinner. We're going to celebrate. And he's like, oh, well, what are we celebrating? And I said, I finished a book. And he sort of looked at me and he's like, what do you mean you finished a book? Everybody finishes a book. And I realized what he was thinking was I finished reading a book. And so I had to say, no, honey, I finished writing my memoir. I finished writing one of the books I've been working on. I finished writing a book. And he lost his mind. He bought drinks. He was so on that bandwagon. Like, he was on the head of the bandwagon.
That's so
because
great.
he got it. And I still didn't get it to the degree that they did. So I think writers have to be the biggest cheerleaders for other writers.
Yeah. So speaking of that, cheerleaders being the biggest, writers being the biggest cheerleaders for other writers, we, within the Creative Academy, have a place which is open for everybody in the world to see, who goes to our website, a page that says our members, and it's really short. It has a picture of our member, a link to their website if they have one, and then writes fiction and nonfiction about girls who get themselves in trouble. That's me. And Ronda Payne has been a member of the Creative Academy for many months and still hasn't given us her picture and her 50-character what she writes. Why is that, Ronda Payne?
Well, because Ronda Payne still struggles with saying that she's a writer when someone like Donna Barker has a tangible book. And you have someone like Eileen Cook has tons of books. So who is Ronda Payne, who just happens to write articles about agriculture and wrote for a community paper freelance and has a story in Chicken Soup for the Soul. Who the heck is Ronda Payne to talk about what she writes? So by no means
can you
I
hear
think
how
I have
silly
this
that
figured
sounds?
out. Oh,
Can you hear how silly that sounds?
oh, trust me. Again, the two brain thing, the logic brain versus the little child brain going, no, not me, I'm not important. But the logic brain is going, oh, for God's sakes, you've been paying your bills for 11 years doing this. And before that, doing it as an employee for somebody else. Yeah. I've been doing this for 11 years on my own, running my own company. And yet I cannot give myself the credit or the credential.
You have not yet. You absolutely can. You have not yet given yourself.
I have not chosen to do that yet.
All right. I think by the time this goes live, I think we have to have that rectified so that Ronda...
So people can find my bio? Okay, so I'm making a note right now because Donna and I are going to be at the same conference right after we're finished taping this. And so I am writing on a sticky note right now, Ronda do bio. And while Ronda and Donna are at
40 characters, you know what, we can even figure out this bio over, you know,
we're gonna do it at dinner. We'll do it at
dinner. In the 5
dinner.
minutes between workshops, we can do this.
Absolutely. So this is gonna happen.
Okay.
And it will happen this weekend while we're at conference. And so when watchers see this,
it will be there.
All this crap about me not having a bio is going to be bunk because you're going to go and look and you're going to say she does have a bio.
So that was worth the price of admission for this conversation. All right. So before we wrap up, or as we're wrapping up, what do you think is, or do you have your favorite success story coming out of the writers group that you co-facilitate?
I am going to go with Sandy Walton. Sandy is retired and she had written a children's book quite a few years ago. She'd started it, she'd stopped it, she hadn't done much with it. And she would come to meetings, and after each meeting, she'd kind of ask a question. So she'd come up to me and she'd say, Rhonda, how do I get an ISBN number? Rhonda, do I need an editor? Rhonda, do I need this? Rhonda, do I need that? And that worked twofold because one, it forced me to recognize how much knowledge I had and how much I learned, and that I was a resource to others. And it also forced me to see how much our members were benefiting from what we were doing. And so Sandy went off, she got her book self-published, and she sells it. She goes out, she goes to sessions, she sells her book, and it's amazing to see this lady have her dream come true, to see her and the excitement on her face when she holds up her book. It's just, it's awesome.
And your group played a role in that.
We helped. We helped.
Absolutely.
We helped. We answered questions where we could. We gave her resources where we could. We pointed her in directions where we could. I mean, she did the work, but
I'm thinking also something you're not mentioning is probably you showed her what writers look like, which is writers look like all of us who have those.
But she is one.
Voices.
That she is a writer, and I guess it's that cheerleader aspect that we talked about earlier. I gave her the cheerleading that I'm still working on giving myself, but I could do it for her. Yeah, Sandy, you go, you can do this. And I was able to do that for her.
Yeah.
And so I think that is the most substantial part of any writers group, is that we are giving gifts to other writers to help them see themselves as writers and to help them succeed as writers.
Absolutely. Well, I am thrilled, absolutely delighted that you're a member of both the in-person group that I'm a part of and the Creative Academy, because it's a whole lot of fun to have you and your energy there and your mentorship.
Now, if only I could turn that inward. We're working. It's a work in progress, people. Work in progress.
You know, For me, I don't recommend people wait this long, but for me, turning 50 was that I really, like, I am 50 years old. I have got to get over
on with
myself.
it. Yeah,
Get on with it. Like,
on with it. And I think
why am I afraid?
It's much the same thing that my tipping point was my dad's passing away, and you know, obviously already not obviously, because nobody knows when my dad passed away. So my dad passed away in March of 2017. So Golden Ears Writers was already established. I'd already been working on my own. But on the plane ride on the way home, I wrote myself a saying, and it sits in one of my notebooks on my desk, and it says, if you don't do it, it doesn't get done.
Mm.
And it's so simple, and yet it was so profound to me in the moment that I'm like, Rhonda, seriously, it's now or never. You're not getting any younger. And my dad used to say, every day above the ground is a good day.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to take advantage of these days above the ground, or I am never going to become that writer that I knew I could be when I was 6 years old.
Yeah.
So I got to do the stuff.
Yeah. It's
there's milestones, right?
I was just going to say that very word. My dad dying was also a huge milestone for me, and it happened when I was 48 or 49. No, which year was it? Anyway, it was in the
you're about the same age as me, because I was 47 when Daddy passed away. So yeah, about that same point in life.
He and I wrote, so I wrote Mother Teresa's Advice for Jilted Lovers at the same time that he was working on his first novel, his only manuscript. It never became a novel because he died before he could edit it. He wrote the first draft. I reviewed the whole thing. I basically did a developmental edit on it for him, and then he got too sick to finish it. But that had been a dream of his entire life. And so he and I were cheerleaders. I was writing this ridiculous women's fiction, and he was writing Clive Cussler-esque, like, which was just, and it was so much fun. And then, so in my turning 50 after my dad died, it was kind of like, come on, like, he would not be impressed with this, that I'm sitting here afraid. And it breaks my heart that he couldn't make it to that, to see what he had written. I
think, one of my biggest sadnesses is that when the Chicken Soup for the Soul story got accepted and I got the contract for it, he wasn't here. Mm. So I celebrated with my mom, but I'm getting weepy.
Yeah, I'm wearing glasses. You can't see. I already am too.
As far as cheerleaders go, my dad was right there. Like, when I talked about that writing course I took when I was 17, he paid for that.
Yeah.
Like, he said, no, this matters. So if I can say anything to you writers watching this, don't brush off those milestones. Take them and do what you need to do with them, and then do the work. It doesn't get done if you don't do it. So do the stuff you got to do. And it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're 17 or you're 25 or you're 80. It's never too late. It's never not the right time. But then again, it's never the right time. So there's that. But just feel the fear and do it anyway. As the book says, just do it.
Yeah. And find the people that you need to cheerlead for you.
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. Rhonda, so lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to me.
And we will see you all around all the places, and looking forward to it. So
cheers.
Are you a member of the Creative Academy yet? Join us today and unlock a wealth of resources, masterclasses, feedback opportunities, and community events designed to help you reach the next step in your writing journey. No matter what stage you're at, we've got a helping hand to guide you along the way. Check out our free resource room if you'd like to get a taste of how we can help you reach your writing and publishing goals. Thank you for bringing us along on your writing and publishing journey. Crystal, Eileen, and I hope to see you around the Creative Academy soon.